there's obviously the donations. A lot of these members in Congress are heavily supported by the defense contractors. We've also kind of got the Defense Department as well, lobbying against this legislation. It came out recently that the former Arrow director, Sean Kirkpatrick, was actually lobbying against the UAPDA. I think he was saying that the review board would basically would make Arrow basically redundant in terms of what they're doing. And then I think there's another aspect to it as well. I think that there are some members of Congress who do feel afraid about this legislation because the intelligence community, I think, has gone rogue. And I think there are some really, really bad elements to this intelligence community. And I think there are some people who are part of these committees who are afraid that they're compromised by the intelligence community. Maybe they've got some skeletons in their past, and they're afraid that they are compromised, that some of these details might come out, or maybe they could be threatened. So I think there's an element of that at play as well.
That's really important. And it's one of those things that is never discussed openly in public, not simply in the United States, but I think anywhere, is the extent of probable blackmail and other kinds of control exerted over people. I've heard the phrase control file being used more than once as a way to refer to how the intelligence community will control politicians. And so this is something that you think you have run into. I don't want you to put anybody on the spot here, but are you suggesting that you've actually uncovered, let's say, reason to believe that this is actively the case relating to this legislation, that there are members of Congress afraid of being blackmailed or being exposed in some way?
All I will say is, information that's already out there in the public. I think it's been said. I think it was Tucker Carlson or someone like that who basically said that a lot of these members of a lot of these politicians are actually quite scared of the intelligence community. Look, there are some really, really nasty factions of the intelligence community. We were warned before releasing the Office of Global Access story that there are some people who are not very nice and they're capable of very, very bad things if this story came to light. And I was also warned as well about the undersea retrieval program, which is one of the most tightly guarded secrets, basically, in terms of classification. That if you went public with any of the details, there are some really, really nasty people. And the best you could do if you report on these details is go public and be as public as possible. That's your best form of protection. And there are other. I just don't think that Congress is fully aware of what's going on. I think a lot of these politicians, especially in the US, are going to fundraisers. They've got other things that they're actually focused on, and that allows the deep state, basically, as some people would call it, to run free and do what they want. I've also been informed about, possibly retrievals of objects in space. If you search for it, there are ways that you could deorbit objects orbiting around the Earth. So what's to say that's not the case with UAP as well?
Deorbiting UAP, is that okay? So this is not something that I have really come across, and I want to ask about the undersea retrievals in a moment. But can you just expand on this idea of deorbiting UAP? It sounds like am I wrong here? Attempting to take down let's say, alien craft that's in Earth orbit. How could they possibly do that unless they're shooting it down? Maybe is that what deorbiting a space-based UAP would be?
So the conversation has come up with one of my sources before about potentially retrieving objects from space, UAP from space, and from there, I can't source this saying that my sources have told me, but I've looked it up, and you can deorbit satellites, old satellites that you want to land back into Earth. So I can imagine that if you did have such a mission, it's come across like this is just my imagination here, okay? Maybe with a little bit of information from sources as well. So it's been explained to me that some UAP are brought down through dogfights. Like you see two UAPs and they're dogfighting each other basically. So that could be one of the scenarios. It ends up as being deactivated so that you're able to deorbit it, or it could be potentially that I don't know, an EMP blast or some type like that to disable it. I don't know. It could be something like that. Right. But I would say that any such mission like that, you'd have to have the National Reconnaissance Office involved, Space Force, Space Command, and then obviously you'd have the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency is involved as well in terms of like, okay, where would this land? How do we track this now and recover it? So there'd be a lot of those elements involved, I can imagine. But obviously, this is just my imagination here. This is not from any sources at all, apart from the information about apparent dogfights. But otherwise, this is just me and my imagination going wild here of how it could work.
let me just say, I'm completing research on a fairly substantial USO project. And I have come across claims of dogfights among UAP in the 21st century that are one in particular that I'm thinking of was supported by at least 3 specific witnesses reporting separately to a particular website about it. I'll have all of that out at some point. The idea of UFOs or UAP dogfighting each other seems a little out there for people, but there have been a number of these, at least allegations that are out there. So it's interesting that you're stumbling into this as well. Very interesting. Relating to the UAP legislation, I want to stick with that for a little longer, if you don't mind, and then move on to some other things that you've been researching. One thing I've noticed in terms of the opposition to this act, both last year and this year, seems to be dominated by members of the Republican Party. I can't think that they are the only opponents to this. I mean, the Democratic Party has its own deep connection to what we can call the deep state. But it nevertheless does seem to be the case. In your article, I was a bit surprised, but maybe I shouldn't be, that you had Rand Paul as one of the people giving resistance. And then you just said now that his staff has denied that. So that's, we don't really know. But have you gotten a sense of how, can you give a more concrete sense of the resistance to this? Have you been able to get a handle on, is it absolutely stemming from the contractors, or is it from the intelligence community, or these members of Congress just ideologically opposed? We were hinting that there might be some pressure exerted on these members of Congress. Can you just go into that a little bit more? Is there anything else you can say about this?
Sure. So firstly, just to address the Rand Paul point, and maybe give that a bit more context as well. In terms of that, I mean, I had spoken to one of my sources, and over the summer, that source told me that Senator Chris Coons, one of his members of staff, had told him that the resistance was coming from Rand Paul. So I had knowledge of it back then. And I think someone else also did say to me that actually it wasn't personal against the UAP stuff. He was just going out and opposing anything that was coming from Chuck Schumer, that was supported from Schumer, but more of a political thing. So who knows? And now I've been told that there's really, really good intelligence pointing to opposition from Senator Mitch McConnell as well. So yeah. It's difficult to piece it together. I'm not sure we'll ever definitively find out. But in terms of, I mean, so it seemed from last time in terms of resistance, it was coming from different places. So you had resistance from the Arrow, so that's the Defense Department, from Sean Kirkpatrick. There was likely resistance as well from the intelligence community, and then you had the defense contractors as well, allegedly, who were against it. Look, I think. So the way it works in terms of the Office of Global Access and a lot of these retrieval missions is they have their preferred contractors, So they have their Lockheed Martins, the Raytheons, BAE Systems, perhaps as well. And then you've got your newer contractors who are new to the game, Some people suggested radiance technology. I think Danny put that out there, Danny Sheehan. So then you've got your new players to the game as well, and they're kind of like, actually, I want a bit of the action as well. Why does Lockheed get to have all the fun? Let's create our own connections to the CIA so that we can get access to some of these craft, or maybe let's see if we can do a transfer from Lockheed Martin to us, something like that. So then all of a sudden, when you get this eminent domain provision, it's kind of like, oh gosh, if that goes through, that means that this craft that we could potentially get our hands on, it could be ruined and all upset by this process, and also the added transparency on top of this as well. So we could suddenly lose possession of this thing. So I mean, that could come to play. Obviously, that's just speculation just coming from me, but I think that might play a part of it. And I mean, it's come out recently in an interview between Lua Zondo and George Knapp about the and it's been reported as well by George Knapp, Com Kelleher, and Lukatsky.
James Lukatsky. Yeah,
yes, that's it. That they were they were basically trying to get transfer of materials, let's say UAP materials, from Lockheed Martin, supported by, from my understanding, it was actually 2 vice presidents perhaps that were actually supportive and backing this kind of transfer going on to Bigelow's facility. And that was stopped by a very, very important person within the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. A very, very powerful person.
I think we're getting closer to the real issue here. And I'm wondering if a lot of this, maybe not all of it, but if a lot of it, this is about who's going to get access to this exotic technology. Is that really what is happening? And you mentioned Robert Bigelow just now. I'm not the only one who's wondered about this, I'm sure, many times. Is this the play that's going on? A certain number of individuals who are prominent, who have their own connections, learned absolutely that, yes, there is such a program to acquire non-human alien technology and bodies, biologics, and they want a piece of it. They want a piece of the action. And I have been wondering, I mean, who can expect that everyone's motives are as pure as the driven snow? We like to think that actors out there are just doing this because they believe in it. They want the truth to come out to the public. And maybe they do. Maybe they want some of that truth out there. But isn't it at least as likely that they've got their own interest in this? And I've often wondered, access to the technology would certainly be a big motivator, and that would be Bigelow. And then you can imagine people at Lockheed thinking, who the hell is Bigelow thinking he can get into our game? And so goes the battle. Is that what you think you're seeing here, Chris?
I think Lockheed Martin is kind of like the US government. There are many faces to it. Although there could be some, important people within the organization, like those 2 vice presidents I was alluding to, who would be for the transfer. I think there would be others that would be against it.
Are you able to mention who these vice presidents are who have been involved in this? Is this not something that you can do? I don't want to put you on the spot here. If you can't, then don't. But
yeah, so I mean, one of the names has been put out there by Lua Zondo in that interview. So that's James Ryder. So he was the vice president for space systems within Lockheed Martin. Actually, if you go and search it up on the rep web, you can see him. He's spoken at a conference before about UFOs. During the last years of his life, he was going to these spiritual conferences, talking about consciousness and spirituality in the electric universe. And it just made you think, for someone from such a technical background who rose all the way to the top at Lockheed Martin, where they've got the most advanced technology and systems available to them, what led this person to suddenly become really, really interested in consciousness and spirituality? Like, what occurred? What has this person seen that's kind of like driven them down that path?
Mm-hmm.
That's the really, really curious thing for me to think about. So I just think that's really, really interesting. That, I would say that. So I think some of the older materials may not actually. I think they may have been leased, let's say, to Lockheed Martin,
mm-hmm.
From the CIA. and maybe, yeah, maybe that was brought to bear. You know, this isn't yours in the first place. Maybe that was brought to bear. But you know, I think the threats that Jim Ryder got from that, I think they really scared him away, and they freaked him out. So he, yeah, and I think, you know, it was cumulative, because they tried to do the same thing with the Department of Homeland Security as well. The Homeland Security was trying to get this material as well, and that was stopped by the same person within the CIA. Yeah, he is not a good influence. This person is not. And
is
look,
is this a name that you know and you just can't say at the moment, or is this a name that you don't yet know?
It's a name that I don't want to say, and I believe some people do know the name, but I don't think they want to say it themselves, and I don't feel comfortable saying it. I think I've probably crossed the line already with my USO stuff. But yeah, like there are some really, really bad people out there, I would say. And look, when we did the Office of Global Access story as well, I'd note that there was actually like a warning that came on to Google when that story got released, saying this is still a very new story. Don't trust everything that you see, or something along those lines, because this is new information coming out. It was very, very rare that you got those warnings from Google. Well, I had never seen one before. But yeah, like I think with Google as well, you've got to look at the trust and safety team. A lot of the trust and safety team have formerly worked at the CIA. And obviously you've got a relationship between big tech and In-Q-Tel as well, which is the commercial arm of the CIA. So, you know, stuff like that does remind you that there are various ways that they could hurt you if they want, and threaten you. So yeah, they're immensely powerful, these people are.
I think you're doing, and let's mention Josh Boswell here again. And I think Matt Ford was one of the authors of your piece on the Office of Global Access. I think you're all doing very important work, and let's just put it out there, brave work in exposing some of this information.